Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Adam Creaney, and I'm going to be discussing today the IdentityIQ plugin framework and going through a short demo. So before we start with the cool fun stuff, the demo stuff, we're going to go through a PowerPoint slide, of course. So let me get that started. There we go. You should be able to see my slides. So my name is Adam Creaney. I'm a senior manager here at SailPoint with Technology Alliances. I've been with the company for just going on 10 years now. And I work with our technology partners. So developers, external developers at other ISVs, independent software vendors who want to integrate with the SailPoint platform. And one of the ways they can do that, one of the extensibility options that they have is the IdentityIQ plugin framework. So what we're going to talk about today is first, what is the plugin framework? What is it meant to do? What are some of the use cases you can solve with that framework? And then we're also going to look at the components, the actual technical makeup of what is a plugin, what are the different elements you can utilize in the plugin. They're all optional. You don't have to use all of them. And then talk through a little bit about what the support model looks like, because that can be a little tricky at first, and then go through the demo. So what is the plugin framework? First, what is a plugin, right? A plugin is an extension to the SailPoint core IdentityIQ platform. So this is an add-on that gets side-loaded, installed with the product, but provides features that the product does not. And so it's just code. It's a code manifest that you import as an archive of the plugin into IdentityIQ. There's a whole UI for it we'll see later, and it deploys your code. So that's the plugin itself. Just think of it as an add-on. And then the framework is what allows that plugin to run in IdentityIQ. And that framework was introduced in IdentityIQ 7.0, I believe. It wasn't quite fully supported at that time. As of 7.1, it is. And then the purpose is to allow for rapid innovation on IdentityIQ. Now, you'll see 7.1 came out years ago. So if you're on a supported version of IdentityIQ, one of the last 3 latest versions, you will have the plugin framework available to you. It provides a couple things. I like to think of it as like a Swiss Army knife or multi-tool. It provides a lot of capabilities. You can get your installer framework, so it's simple drag and drop to install plugins and remove them. But you can also do cool things. You can build background services. You can build out service executors, task executors, policy executors, and we'll get into what each of those are a little bit later. You get your own persistence model, so you get access to a database specific to plugins. So plugins can create tables. They can create the table schema. They can add the indexing to the values for searching faster, things like that. And then you can also use it to modify the UI, customize the user interface in IdentityIQ in a couple different ways. You get to your own full page for the plugin itself, which you can design from the ground up using Angular. You also get this ability to create snippets, JavaScript snippets that execute when certain conditions are met, and we'll see how that works later too. But that can allow you to add elements to, say, the administrator dashboard inside of IdentityIQ. You can add, you can change. I think there's one out there that adds a message of the day to all users or certain admin users. So you can do a lot of UI customization as well. That was really high level around what the plugin framework provides and what you can do with it. Some of the use cases you can get into are things like creating your own customized endpoints, right? So if the out-of-the-box SailPoint API doesn't provide everything you need, if the scheme-based API, and I have a session on that tomorrow, a scheme-based API doesn't provide you the data you need to get out, the identity context you need out of SailPoint, you can create your own. So you can create your own REST endpoints via the plugin framework to extract data. And that's actually the demo we'll see a little later. It's just a simple API creation. So let's get into the technical components. All right. So I mentioned it's like a Swiss Army knife, multi-tool. What makes a plugin? So first, you've got a manifest file. The manifest file is basically the coordinator of all the other components we're going to talk about. This is what tells IdentityIQ where certain classes are, which snippets it can run, the name of the plugin, the version of the plugin, everything about the plugin shows up in the manifest file. You've got the build file. This can be Ant, it can be Maven. It's a way to compile Java code and place the files, XML files, JavaScript, Java, where they need to be inside a compressed zip archive that can then be installed into IdentityIQ. Database scripts, I mentioned you can have your own persistence layer. You can create any kind of database tables you want. And you can create, on installation of the plugin, those database tables get created, and then if you ever delete the plugin from your environment, it'll go and delete those tables as well. It's Java classes. So Java classes, things where you're building customized APIs or a custom service definition, those will be in Java classes. XML artifacts. I've seen people build plugins just to import XML artifacts, because one of the things you can do is you can have an import folder in your build structure, and you can just put your XML artifacts in there for, say you have a pretty complex web services application that has, a bunch of different defined endpoints, as well as before and after rules for each of those endpoints, and there's just a lot. You can put them all into a plugin import folder, and so you can just install it in one, and you can get them sucked into IdentityIQ instead of going through the manual import steps or through the console. And then you have your UI elements. So I mentioned these snippets and these full page plugin pages are all part of the plugin. So diving into each component a little bit more. So the manifest file is the XML representation of the plugin. So if you're ever in IdentityIQ and you're looking at your debug pages, where you can view the XML of an application or a rule or a task definition or a workflow, you'll also see an item in there called plugin. And when you open it, what you're going to see is your manifest. It's essentially the skeleton of your plugin. So this is where you'll list out if you've defined any custom Java classes, you kind of give the class packages for those. This is where if your plugin has any particular settings. So each plugin can have settings included to, if maybe you want to connect to an external source, you could have connection credential information inside those settings. If you want to have differing behavior, if you want, people have the option to turn on and off certain features of your plugin, you could have a settings page set up. And this is where you're going to define your settings for your plugin by name, by type, things like that. This is also where you'll define your snippets. So I mentioned earlier an example where you want to add an element to the admin dashboard for administrators. You can have you can define that in a JavaScript snippet. The snippet will execute when it matches how it's defined in the manifest. So you'll say what pages it should be evaluated on, and that's just a regular expression. It'll match the URL. So when the URL matches that snippet regex, it's going to execute if the person, the login context has a permission. So this snippet will have a regular expression and a permission required. The permission is at the SP write level, so the sale point write level. You can use out of the box ones, or via the plugin, you can actually define your own SP writes and then import them using that XML import function. And then the metadata for the plugin. So you can define what version of IdentityIQ it needs to run on. So if it's not compatible with, say, 7.1, that needs to be on 8.1 or higher. You can define that in the manifest itself. You can give it your friendly name as well as your system, your file name, and then the version of your plugin. So if you want to support your plugin going forward, you can include the version here, and then when somebody calls you up for support, you can say what version are you on, and you'll get it back. All right, going on to the build file. So I mentioned it can be Apache Ant, it could be Maven. It's an automated way to get everything in the right place when you're ready to build. I'll show the example of this later, but basically it's going to create a distribution when you're in your IDE. It's going to create a distribution folder. It's going to compile all the Java classes, creates a jar. It's going to stick that in the distribution folder, and then it's going to move any of those XML objects that were in the import folder into the distribution folder, and then also any of those database scripts, UI components, and things like that. And so once it's done successfully, and there's plenty of examples on Compass and on developer.salepoint.com of these AMP scripts. Once it's done, you'll have a zip archive. That zip archive is the thing you will install into IdentityIQ. And it's fully portable, so you can go and take it to any IdentityIQ instance you're working with and drop it in there. All right, so we talked a little bit about database scripts. So when you first install IdentityIQ, you spend a lot of time looking at the IQ.properties file. This is where you're configuring, the means by which IdentityIQ's front end talks to its back end. You'll notice in all the new versions of IdentityIQ, there's actually a separate section for plugins. And this allows you to turn on and off certain features of the plugin framework. You can say, don't allow execution of database scripts. But if you want to execute these database scripts, you'll see that there's a plugin database username, plugin database user password in that IQ properties file. And that's where you would have connection properties to this other table space, which is for plugins only. So you can install. You can create the tables on install. You can delete the tables when you're done. You don't have to delete the tables when you're done, but you can run into issues if you install a plugin and it creates these tables, and you uninstall the plugin, it doesn't delete those tables. If you try and reinstall that plugin later, it's going to throw a script error. The table already exists. So, yeah, I think that's good for database scripts. So I found that I use these a lot when I'm creating my own data structures that need to be persisted for a long time. So if I'm trying to track usage of some particular feature over time, I don't want to get rid of those. I don't want to lose those. So if I want to see like a history of an event or something like that, I'll use these database tables to do so. All right. So the really cool and powerful features of the plugin really come into play with these Java classes. So the first one to talk about is the REST resources, and this is what we'll demo later. But these are the ones where you can create your own API endpoints, and you can create your own authorization for those endpoints to make sure that people with the right permissions can get access to them, but people who don't can't. You can control, and this supports any type of RESTful operation. So put, post, patch, whatever you want to do, you can do here, which is really great. There's a plugin out there, the SIM plugin, that my team actually built, and that basically all it does is extends the out-of-the-box API to include audit events and syslog events, so that they're reachable from an external source. The executor classes, so service executors, task executors, and policy executors. So every task in SailPoint, if you go to task, task menu, set up tasks, and you choose from the drop-down, there's account aggregation, there's account group aggregation, identity refresh. Those are all driven by a task executor in the background. So if you want to define your own type of task inside of SailPoint via the plugin framework, this is where you do it. You'd write your own task executor Java class. Service executors are very similar to task executors, except services don't require any manual intervention to run. So these are going to be things that probably happen on a more frequent schedule, like every 5 minutes, every 30 seconds. You can define a service executor that will do this in the background. It'll execute your code in the background on a very regular basis. And then the policy executor, policy evaluator, this allows you to define, basically extend the SOD policy features of IdentityIQ. So instead of just being a simple separation of duty, toxic combination of entitlements or something like that, this allows you to say like, this user can't have this entitlement if it's a Wednesday. Just something just really bonkers sort of policy definitions as much as you want to there. All right. So the XML artifacts, I did touch on this. This is where you're just doing bulk import of, it could be if you need a predefined application to make your plugin work, you can define it in an XML artifact and then keep it in that import folder. If you need to define custom SP rights and capabilities to drive your plugin's behavior, you can do that in the XML artifacts as well. And they'll all get installed when the plugin is installed. Now there's a note here that they do not get uninstalled when you uninstall your plugin. So you're going to have, if you're doing a lot of testing, you might end up with a lot of XML artifacts kind of drifting that you'll need to watch out for. And there's reasons why that happens. In case there's tasks that are executing or workflows that are executing that rely on those XML artifacts. If you were to delete them while those are still executing, you can run into problems. All right, and then the UI elements, here's an example of snippets. You can see this one on the screen here is adding a little dashboard widget to the administrator panel. So on the left, you see that regular expression and required rights combination that's in your manifest. So you've got your regular expressions just match any URL. And then if the user has SIM administrator, then execute this JavaScript that's on the right here, which is going to essentially just add an element into the DOM that is a image that links to a full page defined by the plugin. So the full page that you can define a plugin, you can really do a lot of cool stuff, right? It's based on Angular, and we ship a package of SailPoint defined elements you can use to match the look and feel of the base product. But here you can see the example from that SIM plugin that allows you to view kind of alerts from the SIM and SIM related activity that they wouldn't normally be surfaced in IdentityIQ. This allows you to do that. And so you can kind of extend the ability of administrators to see more to what's going on. Widgets were added in 7.2, so you can create custom widgets on a dashboard. Normally you have things like open certifications or open approval items, things like that. You can create your own widget here. So instead of redirecting administrators to that full page for SIM alerts, you could actually include them on their dashboard. Some notes that as I've kind of developed or interacted with developers building plugins that we found, the IdentityIQ class loader and the plugin class loader are different. So if you're writing a workflow in IdentityIQ and you want to access your plugin classes, I don't believe at this point in time you can actually do that. So that is a limitation. Yeah, stuff about caching. They're cached on server start and restart. We already talked about when plugins are removed, those XML objects that are imported are not deleted. So watch out for that. And there were some compatibility issues between 7.0 and 7.1, which we shouldn't really be hitting anymore. But because in 7.0, the plugin framework wasn't a part of the product by default, there were some changes made on 7.1 to make it so, and that kind of breaks the compatibility there. The big one I have to point out is with modifications to the UI. One of the most popular ways people use the plugin framework is to use those snippets and modify the user interface of IdentityIQ to make it look more what they want it to do, right? The problem with that is if we look back at that snippet and that JavaScript, it's very dependent on the main object model of the web page, right? You're looking through elements, you're trying to find certain places to inject your new look and feel. SailPoint doesn't really guarantee that domain object model will change through the course of releases. So if you're heavily using this to customize your user interface, you can have trouble when it comes time to upgrade. That page may change and you'd have to reconfigure or refactor your plugin code. So while it's a really popular thing to do, you just have to be aware of the caveat that there might be additional maintenance required of your plugin versus if you weren't doing that. All right, so plugin support. The plugin support model is really, and this is pretty common, is that the framework itself, the plugin framework that's delivered with IdentityIQ is supported by SailPoint. I mean, that makes sense. It's our product. Plugin support, so the individual add-ons, the individual plugins that developers build are supported by the developer, unless it's like an official SailPoint plugin. It's by the developer. So even if it's one of my technology partners that's built the plugin, we've certified it for them, at the end of the day, that technology partner, the developer, is still responsible for supporting that plugin. So some additional information real quick. There's a developer guide for this up on Compass. It goes through each of these elements I kind of talked about today, but in a little bit more detail. There's a to-do plugin example on Compass as well. I think it's still there. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to find, but that gives you a basic plugin build structure with some artifacts to get you started, get you a head start there. And then you don't really need the release notes, but that's that. So let's get to the fun stuff. And then maybe we can stop and do some QA discussion. So we're going to do a demo. I'm going to switch contexts here. All right. So I've got IdentityIQ 8.3 here. So I'll log in and just show you a couple of the elements that involve plugins in the product itself. So I'm logged in as administrator. So I've got all the permissions. You can see everything. If I go to the gear sign and plugins, this takes you to the main plugin landing page where you can modify your plugins, delete your plugins, and add new plugins. So you can see this environment is a demo environment. So it has quite a number of plugins. You can run, obviously, multiple plugins at a time. And this is where you can turn them on and off to turn the functionality on and off, as well as go in and configure. And this is that settings page where you can add whatever settings you need for your plugin. So that's where we'll install it. But first, let's look at what a plugin actually looks like in, I'm using IntelliJ, you might use Eclipse, it doesn't really matter. You can use Notepad. But here is a plugin. So I mentioned you've got your basic build structure. You've got your import folder. This is where you can import your XML objects. I've created a basic SP write called example plugin write. It's part of an example plugin capability. So once this plugin is installed, we can look at identity and look at their capabilities. And this is one of the options from the multi-pick select list. The manifest, I mentioned that's kind of the most important thing. This is just, again, an example. But I've got my plugin name, plugin example. I've got my plugin version. I've got my min system version. So this is saying 8.0 or higher. And then I've got kind of the pointers to the classes I'm going to write. So you can see here, I'm not doing much in this plugin, right? I've got no task executors, no service executors. I just got a REST resource here. So my REST resource, you can see this package matches kind of what I've defined in my source folder. So column.setPoint.plugin.example plugin, and then .rest.example plugin REST manager. So that's pointing to my new endpoints that I'm going to create. And then down here, I've just got some examples of the settings. So these are just what will show up once we install the plugin. We'll see that settings page. I'm not doing much else. There's a snippet here, but that's not working right now. But you'll see I've also got my build folder, my build ant file. So again, this is in IntelliJ. I can just configure this as an ant source and run my different commands here. But if we walk through this, you'll see it's basically just compiling Java, moving files around, and creating the folder structure for the distributable. So what I want to do now is I'm going to package this up. So I'm going to execute. And what that's going to do is it's going to go in here and it's going to compile my Java. I've got one endpoint I've defined. And so this is usually using the Java extension web services REST service to create different endpoints. I've gotten the overall path to your plugin endpoints that you create are defined inside of here. So by default, it goes to, and I'll have to double check this. By default, it's going to go to your base IdentityIQ URL /plugin/rest, and then what you define in here. So your plugin example is the base path, and then this particular endpoint is sitting at where's get example. So here, this is doing nothing, right? This is just a very simple example. This is just going to respond with it works. It worked. It's a get request. The required write for this class to be accessed is example plugin write, which is what I've defined in my XML here. And then we're going to go ahead and run the build. Hopefully it works. Hopefully the demo gods are happy today. So it's going to start. We'll get a build folder created, which contains my distribution folder, which is the archive that I'm going to install into IdentityIQ. So if I flip on back to the plugin page, you have two options here. You click new, and then you can choose the file, or you can just drag and drop the file into this area, which I'm going to do here. So I've got my plugin. It just got built. It's going to install. If you run into errors here, there's a plugin installer class that you can turn on logging for, and it'll give you more detailed description of what went wrong during your installation. But you can see now if I scroll down, I've got my plugin example here. If I click configure, you can see those settings that I had defined in my manifest show up. I'm not really using those for anything right now, but you get the idea. Once that's installed, what I can do is that should mean that my endpoint is now available. So if I go over to Postman, I've got my Postman set up already for get request to my URL for my IdentityIQ tenant /plugin/rest. So that's plugin example and then get example. So I send that, let's see what happens. Again, it worked. It worked back. So that's the basic setup. But what you can imagine, there's a lot more you can do, right? I'm just returning a simple string, but once you get into it, you can return contextual data from SailPoint. So instead of just returning the string, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return count of users that have a name, for example. So you can access the context. Here's the instantiator here, SailPointFactory.get current context. It's important to note that when you're setting this up, when you're setting your project up, you can add an external library to your project. You can point that at the base SailPoint classes lib folder to get all the access to the SailPoint Java libraries. So I've already done that, so I can get access to this context. I'm going to create a quick projection query to get some information from SailPoint. Query options. We need a filter. I do say name. We're going to search for all users whose name is Adam Kennedy. It's usually in most of these environments. And then we're going to do a int count equal to. I hope to add the filter. Chemicals context dot count objects. I do identity.class, and then I'm going to use my query options. Then string. What am I doing wrong here? Yeah, I got it. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to run my clean command from my ant. And I'm going to repackage. Once that's done, I can go back into IdentityIQ. What I'll do is I like to just delete the previous version of my plugin just to make things clean. So I'm going to delete that plugin. See, it's gone. And what I'll do is I'll add the next version. Now I didn't update my version number, which was probably poor form, but this isn't a major release, so don't think it's necessary. That's now installed again, and then I should get a different, either an error or a different response back from my endpoint that I defined. All right, so I found one Adam. I think that makes sense since name is generally a unique value. We can go in here and see. Got one Adam Kennedy there. So that's how you can create a really simple endpoint. As I said, this is popular amongst a lot of the developers I work with, just because one of the primary things they want to do to extend the investment of IdentityIQ in their environment is to get the information out. And sometimes with IdentityIQ, the out-of-the-box APIs aren't sufficient to do that, or don't do what you want to do. So you have to extend it using the plugin. Now, there's obviously other things you can do, right? It supports posting operations. You could initiate jobs from an endpoint on demand. The sky is really the limit with the plugins. The one thing I want to show was I did, mention that this plugin installs a capability. So if we go look at the available user rights, we should see that plugin, where did it go? Plugin administrator is installed out of the box. This should be example plugin administrator. There you go. So that's the one that got installed from the plugin framework. All right. We are running a little early. I know Jordan said that might happen, but I did come in about 15 minutes early. So do we have the ability to do live questions and answers in chat? All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time. I know that was a lot of information very quickly. There is another session this afternoon. Mike, I believe, is doing it on more intricate plugin development. I can be reached on the developer forum if you have any questions, and thank you very much for your time.